Welcome to RSTV. This episode on 15 Minutes of Terror is a part of a series of episodes made on Chandrayaan 2. The Vikram lander with rover in its belly will land on the moon on the wee hours of September 7. From the time the spacecraft is set in the motion for landing, in 15 minutes, the spacecraft will touch down the surface of the moon. ISRO Chairman Dr. K. Sivan described this as 15 minutes of terror. Why it is a big challenge? In this episode, we will examine this aspect. But before that, let's take a brief look on this package.
The crucial separation from the orbiter was completed on September 2nd, and the lander module Vikram is at the doorsteps of Moon. The Vikram module orbited around the Moon in an elliptical orbit 30 km by 100 km. The D-orbit commenced at 1:40 am on 7th September. Within 10 minutes, the altitude drops to 7.4 km. Still, it has to travel many kilometers to reach the designated landing point. At this altitude, the craft is still traveling at a speed of 526 km per hour. In next 1 minute, it drops to an height of 5 km and the craft is now tilted by 50 degrees. Within next about 2 minutes, the height is reduced to 400 meters and the navigational instruments in the craft identifies the landmarks. It then drops to 100 meters and hovers above the spot. The craft is now vertical ready to touch down. It senses hazards and makes adjustments. It then drops to 10 meters and again hovers the place, detecting potential place to land. Using the retro rockets, it lands on the surface of the moon.
To know more on this, we have with us Dr. V Venkateswaran, who is a senior scientist in Vigyan Prasar. So welcome to RSTV. So why this ISRO had described this event as a 15 minutes of terror?
Yeah, it's a very crucial operation and Dr. K. Shivan, right from the beginning of the launch of this Chandrayaan 2, in almost all press briefings and any interaction with the public, has described this as a very, very important event. Not launching, not the earthbound phase, not the phase towards going towards the moon, not the separation, not the orbiter going around the moon, but this 15 minutes he has been focusing right from the beginning. There is a very important reason for that. If you look at the status, okay, we had already sent Chandrayaan 1 to moon. Chandrayaan 1 had already reached moon. So, which means that reaching moon is not new to ISRO. If you look at again, similarly, we have sent a Mars orbiter mission to Mars. And so even reaching Mars and putting a satellite, a spacecraft around the planet is also not a new challenge to ISRO. Of course, every time that you do, it's a challenge, but it's not a new challenge. But if you look at this project, the Vikram, the lander, which is on the top, and the orbiter, they were combined together as a single module and sent towards the moon. And they were separated when they were going around the moon. And then the lander alone is expected to soft land on moon. It's like, for example, an aeroplane landing on a airport. Okay, aeroplane landing on an airport. I mean, so it has to soft land. It cannot just come and fall like a stone. Okay. This operation is new to ISRO. Although many other countries would have done it, for ISRO, this operation of soft landing on any other object is the first time the ISRO is doing. The second, the lander is also carrying a payload called Chandrayaan, a rover, in its belly. So that rover is also supposed to operate on the surface of moon. These two are very, very new to ISRO. And this 15 minutes of terror is because this is a 15 minutes almost 15 minutes and 36 seconds that the Vikram lander will come from about 30 kilometers and land softly on the surface of moon. This whole operation is going to take about 15 minutes, 36 seconds, and that's going to happen on the early morning of 7th September. And when it is successful, it's going to be a historic moment for ISRO.
So it's a very nail-biting event. So,
And this lander, if you see, is again this rover, if you see, is a new system which ISRO has to manage because it has never done it in its past. This kind of a rover.
it's very fascinating and very nail-biting event. So the other question is why it is very difficult?
Yeah, it's a interesting thing if you want to look at landing on other surfaces. Now look at here. This is the prototype of a lander which was sent by the erstwhile Soviet Union, what we might today call as Russia. It's a lander to Venus. Okay, 1969, the first human being landed on moon. 1959, the first spacecraft landed on moon. Okay, now you have this spacecraft, Venera 7, which landed on Venus on 1970. Okay, long back.
Long back.
But it's using a parachute to land. Okay, if you look at this is the surface of the Venus, which the Venera spacecraft took a color image, which is the first photograph of any other planet that any other spacecraft actually took. Here you see a postal cover released by the erstwhile Soviet Union, which is a postal cover for Mars 2, which is again a lander which was sent to Mars, which soft landed on Mars in 1971. Again, you can see a parachute very clearly, right? So in both Venus and in Mars, if you have to soft land, you can use parachute because they have substantial atmosphere.
Okay.
Something very similar to Earth. Even in Earth, if you send a astronaut to space or a cosmonaut to space, when you want to come back, you use a parachute.
Okay.
Because Earth has a good level of atmosphere, very thick atmosphere, so the parachute can bring you down safely. Okay. But when you're talking about moon, moon is having no appreciable atmosphere at all. I mean, scientists might say that there is a 10 years atmosphere, but it's a more vacuum than the vacuum in your vacuum flask. Okay. So which means that there is no atmosphere. So which means that in moon, when you want to land, soft land, you cannot use a parachute at all. So you'll have to think of some other way of landing on moon.
Okay.
So it's a major difficulty.
So if they cannot use a parachute, how they will soft land?
So if you look at Diwali, most of us would have fired a rocket, fireworks. Okay? When you light a rocket, the fire and the exhaust comes down and the rocket goes up. So whenever we think of a rocket, we usually think of it as an object which will speed things up. If you want to send something really very fast or to space, that's when you have to send a really very fast or a missile, okay, you use a rocket. That's what we usually think from our daily experience. Okay, but now let's look at this example. Okay, if you are a fireman or a firewoman, for that example, you are holding the hose and somebody opens up the tap. The moment the water gushes out, you will feel a push backwards.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Suppose if I hold the hose on this side, I will feel a push in this side. If I hold the hose in this side, I will feel a push in this side. Okay. So whenever something is gushing out, on the opposite side, you have a push.
Yes.
Now, assume that I am in a cycle. I am pedaling. Okay. I am pedaling forward. And I have a pipe like this. And water is coming out of it. And I am keeping the pipe pointed backwards. So the water is going backwards. So I'll get a push forward.
Correct.
So I'll be able to cycle faster.
Yes, yes.
But suppose if I hold and point it in the front, the water goes out. Because of that, I am getting a push. If I pedal, I'll not be able to go that fast. In fact, my speed will be retarded.
Oh, reduced.
So if you fire a rocket on the same direction of your motion, you can retard your speed. If you fire a rocket on the opposite direction of your motion, you can speed it up.
Okay.
This is a very, very interesting aspect. So when you fire a rocket on the same direction of the motion, Usually it's called as retro rocket.
Retro rocket.
Retro rocket, and this retro rocket retards your speed.
Speed.
In fact, it's also some experience that we have in our daily life. Like, for example, if you are playing cricket and then you are catching a ball, when the ball is coming into your hand, you take it backward in the same direction of the motion. So you don't feel the push of the ball. Okay, you are reducing its impact on you, right? So it's the same principle that we actually use in some of our daily life experience, like cricket. That's how the retro rockets will fire. For example, in this image, if you are not aware about the retro rocket, you will be thinking that the spacecraft is lifting off from the surface of the moon.
Yes.
No, it is not lifting off from the sun. It's actually dropping down to the moon. Okay, the retro rockets are firing because the moon will be pulling the spacecraft down. It's pulling down the moon. Okay, there is a gravity, so it's pulling down. So you'll have to reduce that pull. So you fire the rocket on the opposite side, so it will gently soft land on the moon. This is exactly what ISRO has to do on September 7th to land the Vikram safely on moon.
So this retro rocket science is very amazing, sir. But we'll take here a short break. We'll come after the break. Welcome back. TV sir, before the break, we were talking about the retro rocket science. But now, can I ask you, like, what are the stages of this 15-minute
it's a very interesting aspect. I mean, it's not a very simple thing. If you actually look at the landing sequence, you can classify them into largely 4 important aspects. Okay, this all 4 aspects are going to take place in this 15 minutes of terror.
Okay.
That's the important stuff. Okay, if you look at the first part, okay, the first stage, it's called powered descent initiation. The Vikram lander is going around the moon like a satellite. So you want to make the satellite land. Okay, so you are going to reduce its height. So what you are going to do is that you are going to fire the retro rocket. When you fire the retro rocket, it will start coming down. Its altitude will come down. Its altitude will come down to about 7.4 kilometers.
7.4 kilometer.
From it's a perigee. Perigee is roughly about 30 kilometers. So from 30 kilometers, it will come down to 7.4 kilometers, roughly in 10 minutes.
In 10 minutes.
So which means the first part is going to take 10 minutes of your 15 minutes of terror.
Oh.
All the remaining is going to happen in less than 5 minutes.
Okay.
That's the most important stuff. The second part is braking. So when the spacecraft has come to 7.4 kilometer, its speed will be something close to 580 kilometer per hour.
Oh.
Okay, 580 kilometers per hour, it's like a terrific speed. Okay,
Obvious.
so at that speed, the spacecraft cannot land on the moon. So you have to brake, you have to reduce its speed. So the second part is called as braking phase.
Okay.
So you fire the retro rocket again more efficiently, and you reduce the speed from about 580 to about 300 kilometers per hour. By this time, the rocket has just come down to 2.5 kilometers. So it is now at the height of 5 kilometers.
Okay.
It's only at the height of 5 kilometers, okay? It has not come down substantially, but you have reduced the speed by using this braking, okay? And the third is called as pitch up. Pitch up means at this point of time, the spacecraft is vertical, okay? The lander legs are like this. Lander legs are like this. Lander legs are like this. And the spacecraft is moving like this. But it has to land like this. So which means it has to turn. So you turn the pitch, but not completely, only to about 50 degrees. You turn it to 50 degrees, that is the pitch up stage. In that stage, actually the spacecraft will do some navigational testing. So from 500 kilometers, it will come down to 400 meters in this phase. So when it comes to the 400 meters from the ground, the height, the velocity will become 0. So which will literally mean it will be staying on the same place.
Okay.
Maybe slightly oscillating, but it will be staying on the same place, roughly above your landing site.
Oh.
That is your last phase, the approach phase.
Approach phase.
So these are the 4 important stages. We will look at some of these things a little bit more clearly. In the first stage, when you are coming down from 30 kilometers to 7.4 kilometer, you are only interested in your height.
Okay.
So the altimetry, that is altimeter, which means that which measures your height, the spacecraft height, is what is being looked at. But when you are into the braking phase, you are not only looking at reducing your height, you also want to go to your destination.
Okay.
So TRN, that is terrain recognition navigation.
Navigation.
This particular aspect, terrain relative navigation, this particular aspect will come into play. What is this terrain relative navigation? We'll see a bit later. Then afterwards, you come to HTA. HTA is hazard detection and avoidance.
Okay.
Suppose if my lander is landing here and the surface of moon is completely cratered. Okay, so there can be a pit, there can be a stone. So if my lander is going to fall into a crater, or one of the leg is going to go into a crater, that's not going to be a good idea, right? So that is what is hazard detection and avoidance. So at that time, the spacecraft is about 50 degrees tilted, and the cameras on its leg can see the surface. That is why you are tilting it. They can see the surface. They can identify whether the ground is clear, which part is fine, which part is hazard. They can do all these things. In the last phase, you are around 400 meters above the ground. So you are able to make even a better recognition of your ground surface, and you will know whether the surface is good for landing or not. Whether there is a pit, whether there is a stone, whether there is some hazards which will hamper the landing of the Vikram lander. These all will be detected in the last phase. This is how the different aspects of landing is going to take place. And as I was saying, except for the first phase, all the remaining phases just going to be in 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
The last part, which is a very, very crucial aspect, starts when the craft is around 100 meters above the ground.
Okay.
100 meters above the ground, the craft will use its camera to look more closely the ground. Because there can be small craters, there can be small stones. You will look at the ground very carefully. And then it will then come down to about 10 meters. Once again, it will look at the ground. In all these places, it will stay, it will hover. For at 100 meters, it will hover for 25 seconds. And at 10 meters, it will hover for about 10 seconds. And from 10 meters, it will just come down.
Okay.
Okay.
To
So
its
once you are
comfortable-
finally clear that that place is good for landing, the lander legs are not going to get stuck in some hole or by some stone on the surface of the moon, then the landing will take place. This last phase is going to be happening in less than 1 minute.
1 minute.
Less than 1 minute. So when we talk about the 15 minutes of terror, it's a whole part. The 10 minutes is going to be just reducing the height from 30 kilometers to 7.4 kilometers. So remaining 5 minutes is really, really, really a very tricky operation.
Oh, great.
And the last part, when it is going to land, I was talking to you, right? For example, about 100 meters, the cameras will look at the surface and then will find if the place is not correct. It will slightly move left or right or in one of the directions and then find a right place to land.
Okay.
That's how the landing will take place. So it's a very, very tricky operation. It's not something that happens every day. That's why ISRO is constantly saying that it's a 15 minutes of terror.
So before this question, I want to ask you that will the public will able to see the live visuals of landing?
Live visuals of landing, I don't think it's going to happen because there is no camera on the surface of the moon which is going to capture the landing. No, that's number one.
Okay.
Number two, of course, there are cameras on the lander legs which can capture the images, which it will be capturing and then will be using for its own processing. But I don't think at that point of time, the communication capacity ISRO would be using to take these images.
Okay.
ISRO would be using this time to get data. Telemetry data, the functioning data, its position data, things of this kind rather than actually, of course, it will be very nice, it will be very great if you can actually see when the landing takes place.
Yes.
Perhaps later the ISRO might release that landing images because it will be there stored in the system. But I don't think it will be done live because we may not have that kind of a communication capacity.
Okay. So how these operations are controlled then?
Yeah, this I think a very important point, because most of us might think, like for example, when you are playing a video game, let's say for example you are driving a car, video game car, okay, you are controlling the car virtually. You are sitting in a table, you are using a system, maybe some tools, or maybe the computer keyboard, and you are controlling the movement of the car, whether to turn right, left, you are seeing what is coming, maybe somebody is crossing, so you are putting a brake. This cannot happen when you are going to do a satellite like Vikram landing on the surface of the moon. This cannot happen, because this whole process is going to take place in 15 minutes, and as I said, the crucial aspects are going to take in just 5 minutes, and the last phase is going to be less than 1 minute. You can't do it sitting on the ground. Okay? So all this are artificially the satellite is enabled for it.
Okay.
Let's take one example, for example. Assume that the lander, Vikram, I was telling you about terrain relative navigation, right?
Correct, correct.
So it is taking photograph of its whatever is the ground below, okay, and using an onboard map. Suppose, let's say the satellites come to the conclusion it is in a place where you see it as violet round. Can you see the violet round over there?
Yes, yes.
Okay, that violet round. So which means your target landing place is that red round. So the satellite has to move in that direction which is marked in green. But suppose the satellites find that it is on top of this, what you can see as a black round. Can you see the black round?
Correct.
Then it means that the satellite to move in that black line direction. All these decisions has to be autonomously performed. I mean, you can't do it from the ground.
Okay.
Okay, so the Vikram lander's onboard computers are trained for it. It's called machine learning. Through algorithms and software, you have trained the system so that it will navigate using this. This is one example I'm saying, that all other, for example, finding the hazard, etc., there are algorithms and software which are loaded already into the Vikram lander. Most interesting point, all the softwares and algorithms were designed, developed and produced by Indian scientists in Indian institution. That's a very, very important aspect.
Oh, great, great. So thank you for coming and sharing the valuable information about this 15 minute of terror. But before that, let's take a look on this 15 minute of terror, an animation made by us.
The crucial separation from the orbiter was completed on September 2nd, and the lander module Vikram is at the doorsteps of Moon. The Vikram module orbited around the Moon in an elliptical orbit 30 km by 100 km. The deorbit commenced at 1:40 am on 7th September. Within 10 minutes, the altitude drops to 7.4 km. Still, it has to travel many kilometers to reach the designated landing point. At this altitude, the craft is still traveling at a speed of 526 km per hour. In next 1 minute, it drops to a height of 5 km and the craft is now tilted by 50 degrees. Within next about 2 minutes, the height is reduced to 400 meters and the navigational instruments in the craft identifies the landmarks. It then drops to 100 meters and hovers above the spot. The craft is now vertical ready to touch down. It senses hazards and makes adjustments. It then drops to 10 meters and again hovers the place, detecting potential place to land. Using the retro rockets, it lands on the surface of the Moon.